Mrs. Carter, I didn't expect to see you after what your son told me. The man said it so casually that, for a second, I thought he had mistaken me for someone else. I had only been inside his taxi for a few seconds. I had not told him my name. I had barely closed the door behind me. Yet there was something in the way he said it that made my hand stop halfway to the seatbelt. I looked at him through the rearview mirror. He was a middle-aged black man with tired eyes and a neatly trimmed gray beard. His name, I would later learn, was Raymond Brooks. "I'm sorry," I said. "Do I know you?" He gave a small, uncertain shake of his head. "No, ma'am. But I know your son." My son, Marcus, was supposed to be at home that morning, finishing the last details before his business trip to Chicago. At least, that was what he had told me. I had spent the previous evening helping him gather a folder of documents he said he needed for an early meeting. He had kissed my cheek before going upstairs and told me, "Mom, I'll see you in the morning." That was the kind of sentence a mother remembers without realizing she is storing it away. The taxi was not even the one I had meant to enter. It was still dark outside, and I had mistaken Raymond's car for the ride Marcus had arranged for me. I was supposed to go to the pharmacy before heading back home. Instead, I had climbed into the wrong car. A simple mistake. Nothing more. At least, that was what I believed when I closed the door. Raymond glanced at me again. "You're Marcus Carter's mother, right?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. "Then I think I should tell you something." I felt a quiet pressure settle behind my ribs. "What is it?" He hesitated. "I picked up Marcus last night." I stared at him. "Last night?" "Around 10:40. I almost smiled because the answer seemed so easy. "That can't be right." Marcus was home. Raymond kept his eyes on the road. "I thought he was going to tell you." That sentence stayed between us. I looked down at my hands. They were perfectly still. I remember being surprised by that. A younger version of me might have started asking questions immediately. But at 68, I had learned that people often reveal more when you give them room to keep talking. "Where did you take him?" I asked. Raymond named a street I knew. It was across town, near a hotel district. My stomach tightened. Marcus had never mentioned going there. Was he alone? I asked. Raymond was silent for a moment. Then he said, "No," the word was quiet. Almost apologetic. I looked back at him. Who was with him? He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. A woman. I did not ask her name. I already had a feeling I knew. Danielle. My daughter-in-law. The thought came so quickly that I almost pushed it away. Danielle had told me Marcus was staying home that night. She had even called me after dinner and reminded me that his flight was early. Everything suddenly felt slightly out of place, like a photograph that had been moved 1 inch from where it belonged. Raymond turned on to the next street. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "there's something else." I looked at him. "What?" He lowered his voice. She asked him if his mother knew. I felt the world become very still. I looked out the window at the passing houses, the pale morning light spreading across the sidewalks. I did not know what she meant. I did not know what Marcus had been hiding. But I knew one thing. I had gotten into the wrong taxi that morning. And somehow, it had taken me straight to the first crack in a story my own family had been telling me. For the rest of that morning, I kept hearing Raymond's voice in my head. She asked him if his mother knew. I did not know what the question meant. I did not know what Marcus had been hiding. But I knew I could no longer treat the previous night as an ordinary night before a business trip. When Raymond dropped me at the pharmacy, I thanked him and stepped onto the sidewalk. The morning air was cool, and the streets were only beginning to fill with traffic. I stood there for a moment with my purse tucked beneath my arm, watching his taxi disappear around the corner. Then I walked inside. I bought the prescription I had come for. I paid at the counter. I smiled at the pharmacist when she asked how I was doing. Everything looked normal. That was the strange part. My life had not changed on the outside. The same cars passed the store. The same woman pushed a stroller down the sidewalk. A man in a blue jacket stood outside the coffee shop, looking at his phone. Nothing had moved except the way I was seeing things. Marcus had told me he was home the night before. I could still picture him standing in my kitchen. He had been wearing a gray sweater and holding a folder against his chest. "Big day tomorrow," he had said. "I need to be rested." I had believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. I had spent 39 years believing that when Marcus told me something, there was no reason to search for another version of it. On the drive home, I noticed how quiet the neighborhood seemed. My house sat at the end of a short street lined with maple trees. I had lived there for 26 years. Every crack in the sidewalk was familiar to me. Every morning, I knew which neighbor would bring in the newspaper first. That morning, even the familiar things seemed slightly misplaced. When I opened my front door, I saw Marcus's coffee mug still sitting beside the sink. He had left it there the night before. I picked it up and washed it. Then I stopped. I remembered his words. "I'll see you in the morning." I looked at the clock. He should have already been getting ready for the airport. I called him. It rang twice before he answered. "Morning, Mom." His voice was calm. Too calm, perhaps, though I told myself that was imagination. "Are you packed?" I asked. "Almost. Did you sleep well?" There was a pause. "Yeah. I was exhausted." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Good. I thought you were going to have a late night." Another pause. "Short. Barely there." "No. I stayed home." I looked at the clean counter in front of me. "I see." He continued talking about his flight, his meetings, and the hotel. I listened. I asked nothing about the taxi. Nothing about the woman. Nothing about the street Raymond had mentioned. When we ended the call, I stood alone in the kitchen. I could have called him back. I could have asked the question that was sitting in the middle of my chest. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept old receipts, appointment cards, and small pieces of paper I never seemed able to throw away. I took out a notebook. I wrote down the time Raymond had given me. 10:40 p.m. Then I wrote the name of the street. I stared at the two lines for a long time. I was not investigating my son. Not yet. I was simply trying to understand something that did not make sense. That was what I told myself. Then my phone lit up. It was Danielle. "Hi, Evelyn," she said brightly. "Did Marcus call you this morning?" I looked at the notebook on the counter. "Yes," I said. "He did." She laughed softly. "Good. He must be nervous about the trip." I almost asked her where she had been the night before. Instead, I said, "I'm sure he'll be fine." She changed the subject. We talked for another minute. Then she said goodbye. I placed the phone down. I looked again at the notebook. The first line was simple. The second was simple. Together, they were not. I closed the notebook. I did not know it yet, but that little book would soon hold more than dates and addresses. It would hold every detail my family had hoped I would forget. The next morning, I watched Marcus leave for the airport from my front window. He smiled when he saw me standing there and lifted one hand in that familiar way he had done since he was a boy. For a moment, I almost forgot what Raymond had told me. Almost. Marcus had always been good at making difficult things look ordinary. He was 39 now, successful, confident, and careful with his words. When he was 8, he used to leave his shoes in the middle of the hallway. When he was 18, he would disappear for hours and come home pretending nothing had happened. I had spent a lifetime learning his silences. But this silence felt different. "Take care of yourself, Mom," he called. "I will," I said. Then his car disappeared beyond the row of maple trees. I closed the curtain and returned to the kitchen. Danielle called 20 minutes later. "He made it to the airport," she said. "Good," I answered. "I'm glad." There was a pause. "You sound tired." "I didn't sleep much." Another pause. "Neither did I," she said. Something about the way she said it made me look at the notebook on the counter. I kept my voice light. "I thought you slept at home." "I did." Her answer came too quickly. I said nothing. She began talking about Marcus's meetings, his hotel, and how busy his schedule would be. I listened carefully. Not because I wanted to catch her in a lie. I simply wanted to understand what I was missing. When we ended the call, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my notebook. 10:40 p.m. The street Raymond had mentioned. A woman. Then one more sentence. She asked him if his mother knew. I stared at those words until the ink seemed darker than before. I thought about the previous few months. There had been little changes. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to notice if you were paying attention. Marcus had stopped dropping by on Sunday mornings. Danielle had started answering his phone when I called. There were dinners I was no longer invited to. Whenever I asked, there was always a reasonable explanation. Marcus was busy. Danielle was tired. They had plans. Life was complicated. I had accepted every explanation because accepting them was easier than wondering whether my place in my son's life was changing. That afternoon, I found an old photograph while cleaning a drawer. Marcus was 17, standing beside his father at the barbecue in our backyard. He was smiling with his arm around his father's shoulder. I remembered that day clearly. Marcus had told us he wanted to build a business one day. His father had laughed and said, "Then learn how to keep your word first." I smiled at the memory. Then the smile faded. Keeping your word had always mattered to us. That evening, I received a message from Marcus. Landed safely. Busy tomorrow. Love you, Mom. I read it twice. There was nothing strange about it. Yet I noticed what was missing. No mention of the hotel. No mention of the trip. No mention of last night. I placed the phone face down. I did not call him. I did not confront Danielle. I did not tell either of them about Raymond. Instead, I took out a folder where I kept Marcus's old business cards and the paperwork he had once asked me to hold for him. I found the card of an old family friend, Thomas Reed, who had worked with Marcus when his company was still small. I had not spoken to Thomas in almost 2 years. I stared at his number for several seconds before putting the card back. Not yet. I needed facts, not assumptions. That night, I made tea and sat by the living room window. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I thought about how easy it was to ignore small changes when you loved someone. You explained them away. You gave people the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself that family relationships changed with time. But sometimes the smallest details were not random at all. Sometimes they were pieces of a story someone hoped you would never put together. I closed my notebook and whispered to myself, "I'm not going to accuse anyone." Then I looked at the date I had written beneath the taxi information. I'm just going to find out what happened. By the following afternoon, I had stopped looking at the clock. I had stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I was beginning to understand that waiting for someone to tell you the truth can become its own kind of trap. If Marcus wanted me to know something, he would tell me. If Danielle wanted me to understand something, she would explain it. But neither of them had. So I went back to the details I had dismissed. I remembered the Sunday dinner 2 months earlier when Marcus arrived almost an hour late. Danielle had been sitting beside him, answering questions before he could. His schedule has been crazy, she had said with a smile. Marcus simply nodded. At the time, I had laughed and told them both that I understood. Now I wondered why Danielle had needed to answer for him. Then there was the afternoon I had stopped by their house with a pie. Danielle opened the door but did not invite me inside. She stood in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame. Marcus is working, she had said. Maybe another day. I had smiled and handed her the pie. She thanked me. The door closed. I remembered standing on the porch for a few seconds longer than necessary. I had told myself she was tired. I had told myself everyone needed privacy. I had told myself that being a good mother sometimes meant knowing when to step back. Those explanations had protected me from a harder thought. Maybe I had already been pushed farther away than I realized. That evening, I opened my old photo albums. There were pictures of Marcus at every age. His first day of school. His high school graduation. His wedding. The first Christmas after his father passed away. I turned each page slowly. In almost every photograph, there was a version of my son who had once looked at me without hesitation. Somewhere along the way, that changed. Not all at once. There was no single day I could point to and say, that was when I lost him. It happened in small pieces. A missed dinner. A shorter phone call. A weekend he suddenly could not spare. A family gathering where Danielle seemed relieved when I left. I closed the album. I did not want to turn memories into evidence. That would have been unfair. But then I remembered Raymond's words again. She asked him if his mother knew. That was not a memory. That was something someone had actually said. I went to the kitchen and opened the notebook. Under the original notes, I wrote 3 questions. Where was Marcus at 10:40 p.m.? Why was Danielle with him? What did she think I might know? I stared at the third question the longest. The next morning, I called Thomas Reed. He answered after several rings. Evelyn. I haven't heard your voice in years. I smiled despite myself. I know. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. Is everything okay? I almost said yes. Instead, I asked a simple question. Have you spoken to Marcus recently? There was a pause. A few weeks ago. About business? Another pause. Mostly. I noticed the word. Mostly. Thomas, I said gently, did Marcus ever mention a trip he was planning? Silence filled the line. Not the ordinary kind. The kind that tells you the person on the other end is deciding how much to say. Finally, he said, why are you asking? I looked down at my notebook. Because I think my son may have forgotten to tell me something. Thomas sighed. Evelyn, I don't want to get involved in family matters. My fingers tightened around the pen. Neither do I. I paused. But if there is something I should know, I would rather hear it from someone who cares about him. Another long silence. Then Thomas said, you should probably check the paperwork Marcus asked me about last month. My heart beat once, hard. What paperwork? He did not answer immediately. I think you should ask him yourself. The call ended a minute later. I remained at the table, staring at the notebook. The taxi had given me one question. Thomas had just given me another. And for the first time, I understood that whatever Marcus and Danielle were hiding might have nothing to do with the business trip at all. I called Thomas again the next morning. I had barely slept, but I did not want my voice to sound different. Thomas, you mentioned paperwork Marcus asked you about. What kind of paperwork was it? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Evelyn, I think you should sit down. I was already sitting. I looked at the kitchen table, at the notebook I had been carrying from room to room, and waited. Thomas told me that Marcus had contacted him several weeks earlier about a transfer connected to the company. It was not unusual for Marcus to move money between accounts or update business documents. That was part of running a growing company. What was unusual was that Marcus had asked about an old agreement involving me. What agreement? I asked. Thomas lowered his voice. The one your husband put together years ago. My hand stopped on the edge of the table. My husband, Daniel, had been gone for 6 years. After he died, I had tried not to interfere with Marcus's business. Daniel had built the company from almost nothing, but Marcus had taken it further than either of us imagined. I had always been proud of that. What does the agreement have to do with Marcus? I asked. Thomas sighed. I'm not sure. That's why I'm calling you. He explained that Daniel had once placed certain assets into a protected account with specific instructions about who could access them. I remembered the conversation vaguely. Daniel had told me that he wanted me to be secure no matter what happened to him. At the time, I had been grieving and overwhelmed by paperwork. I signed what his attorney told me to sign. I trusted my husband. I trusted my son. I had never thought I would need to understand every line. Does Marcus have access to it? I asked. Not directly, Thomas said. Not without your authorization. I looked at the notebook again. The taxi. The hotel district. Danielle. The question about whether I knew. And now this. A financial agreement my husband had created years ago. Suddenly, the pieces felt less random. Thomas, I said, why would Marcus be asking about something that belongs to me? He did not answer immediately. That's the part one don't know. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat there for several minutes without moving. I could have called Marcus. I could have demanded an explanation. Instead, I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out the old folder Daniel had given me after his attorney meeting. The paper had softened with age. Some edges were bent. I spread everything across the table. Bank statements. Legal correspondence. An old trust document. A handwritten note from Daniel in the corner of one page. I read it twice. Make sure Evelyn always has a choice. I pressed my fingers against the paper. That was my husband's handwriting. His words. His promise. I had forgotten about that sentence. By lunchtime, I had found the name of the attorney who had handled the documents. Her name was Patricia Monroe. She was still practicing in the same city. I called her office. The receptionist asked for my name. Evelyn Carter. There was a pause after she typed it into the system. Ms. Carter, Ms. Monroe can see you tomorrow morning. I thanked her. Before I hung up, I asked one question. Does she still have the original files from Daniel Carter's estate? The receptionist paused again. Yes, ma'am. She does. I placed the phone down. For the first time since I stepped into Raymond's taxi, I felt something other than confusion. Not anger. Not fear. Clarity. Someone had been asking questions about my husband's old documents. Someone had been moving pieces around me. And I had spent years believing there were no pieces left to move. I gathered the papers and placed them back in the folder. Then I locked the folder in the small desk drawer in my bedroom. I did not tell Marcus. I did not tell Danielle. I did not tell anyone. The next morning, I would sit across from the woman who had helped my husband protect me. And I suspected she was about to tell me exactly what my son had been trying to find. Patricia Monroe looked at me for several seconds before she said anything. Then she closed the folder in front of her and folded her hands on the desk. Evelyn, Daniel was very specific about one thing. I waited. He wanted you to remain in control of your own financial decisions, regardless of what happened to the company. I felt my shoulders loosen slightly. I remember him saying something like that. Patricia nodded. He said it more than once. She opened another file. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of paper moving beneath her fingers. I had expected legal language, dates, signatures. I had not expected to feel my husband's presence in that office after 6 years. Patricia showed me the original trust documents. Daniel had created a structure that separated certain family assets from the business itself. My name was clearly listed. My authorization was required for several major changes. Marcus could manage the company, but he could not simply take control of everything Daniel had protected for me. I read the pages slowly. Why would Marcus be asking about this? I asked. Patricia looked at me carefully. He contacted my office recently. My fingers stopped moving. What did he ask? He wanted to know whether the trust could be modified. The words landed quietly. That was somehow worse than if she had raised her voice. Modified how? I asked. Patricia hesitated. He wanted to know whether certain assets could be moved under another structure. I looked down at the document. Did he say why? He said it was for business planning. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I suddenly understood how carefully people can choose ordinary words when they are trying to hide an extraordinary intention. Business planning. Family planning. Protection. Responsibility. People can make almost anything sound reasonable if they avoid saying what they actually want. Patricia turned another page. There was something else. I looked up. What? He asked whether your authorization could be obtained without explaining every detail to you. For a moment, I heard nothing. The office seemed to grow very still. I thought about the taxi again. Danielle asking Marcus whether his mother knew. Marcus telling me he had stayed home. Thomas telling me to check the paperwork. None of those things stood alone anymore. They were connected. Did Danielle contact you? I asked. Patricia nodded once. She called my office too. I closed my eyes for a second. I was not surprised. That was the part that hurt most. I had spent years treating Danielle as family. I had defended her when relatives questioned why she kept her distance. I had told Marcus that she probably needed time to adjust. I had brought food when she was sick. I had remembered her birthday. I had never asked for anything in return. And now she was asking a lawyer how to get around my decisions. I opened my eyes. Patricia, did Marcus succeed in changing anything? No, I looked at her. Why not? She gave me a faint smile. Because Daniel planned carefully. I looked down at the signature on the final page. My husband's name was still there. Daniel Carter. 6 years gone, and yet he had left behind one thing my son and daughter-in-law had not expected. A boundary. Patricia explained that no major transfer could happen without my written approval. More importantly, she advised me not to sign anything until I understood exactly what was being proposed. I thanked her. Before I left, she handed me a copy of every relevant document. Keep these somewhere safe, she said. And Evelyn? I stopped at the door. Do not tell them you know everything yet. I looked back at her. I wasn't planning to. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Not because the situation was simple. It wasn't. But I finally understood something important. Marcus and Danielle had been moving quietly because they believed I was unaware. They thought silence meant weakness. They were wrong. I walked out of Patricia's office carrying the folder against my chest. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright against the pavement. Cars moved through the intersection. People hurried past me, carrying coffee cups and shopping bags, living ordinary lives. I stood there for a moment and took a slow breath. I did not need to confront my son. Not yet. I needed to know what he planned to do next. And this time, I was going to be ready. When Marcus returned from Chicago, I decided not to mention Patricia. I wanted to see what he would say when he believed I knew nothing. He arrived at my house on Saturday afternoon carrying a small suitcase and the same tired smile he had worn before leaving. "Mom," he said, hugging me. "I missed you." I held him for a moment longer than usual. "I missed you too." Danielle arrived 20 minutes later with a box of pastries from a bakery downtown. She kissed my cheek and walked into the kitchen as if nothing had changed. I watched her place the box on the counter. "I thought you liked the almond ones," she said. "I do," I answered. She smiled. Everything about her looked ordinary. That was what made it difficult. People rarely look like they are hiding something. They pour coffee. They ask about your week. They complain about traffic. They laugh at the right moments. The truth can sit quietly underneath all of it. We ate at the kitchen table. Marcus talked about his meetings. Danielle asked about my garden. I listened. Then Marcus said, "The trip went well. Everything worked out." I looked at him. "I'm glad." "It was a busy few days," he continued. "I barely had time to sleep." I nodded. "You must have been exhausted." Danielle reached for her coffee. He was. I looked at her. "You knew." She paused. "Knew what?" "That Marcus was exhausted." She smiled. "He told me." I smiled back. Of course. No accusation. No raised voice. Just one sentence. Marcus continued telling me about the conference. Then he mentioned the hotel. I waited. The hotel he named was different from the place Raymond had described. I took a sip of coffee. "Was that the hotel near Franklin Avenue?" I asked casually. Marcus looked at me. "No." "Why?" "I thought you stayed there." "No, Mom. We stayed downtown." Danielle lowered her eyes to her plate. I noticed. "I must have confused it with another place," I said. Marcus nodded quickly. "Probably." He moved on. But the room had changed. Not visibly. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet I could feel the silence underneath their conversation. Later, while Danielle was helping me put the dishes away, she asked, "Why were you asking about the hotel?" I dried a plate slowly. "I was just curious." "About what?" "About your trip." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. There wasn't anything interesting. I placed the plate in the cabinet. Sometimes the things people don't mention are the interesting parts. Her hand stopped. Just for a second. Then she laughed softly. "You always think there's a story behind everything." I turned toward her. "Maybe I used to." She looked at me carefully. "What does that mean?" "Nothing." I smiled. "Can you hand me that towel?" She did. Neither of us said anything else. That evening, after they left, I sat at my desk and opened the documents Patricia had given me. I found the section concerning authorization. My name was there. My signature was required. Then I noticed something I had missed earlier. There was a date beside a request for information. The request had been made only 3 days before Marcus left for Chicago. The person who had requested it was listed as an authorized business representative. I read the name twice. It was not Marcus. It was Danielle. I leaned back in my chair. The house was silent again. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I looked at the page for a long time. I finally understood that the taxi had not revealed one secret. It had opened a door. Behind that door was a plan that had been moving quietly for weeks. And now I knew whose hands had been turning the handle. The next morning, I made one decision. I was going to stop waiting for Marcus and Danielle to make sense. I would let the facts speak for themselves. I called Patricia first. I found something in the documents, I told her. Danielle requested information about the trust 3 days before Marcus left for Chicago. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Then you need to be careful, Evelyn." "I know. Do not accuse her yet. Find out what she requested." That was exactly what I intended to do. Patricia helped me obtain the record of the request. It was not a transfer. Not yet. It was an inquiry about whether certain assets could be moved without my direct involvement. The request had been made through a business representative connected to Marcus's company. Danielle had not signed the document herself, but her name appeared in the communication history. I read every line slowly. There it was again. A simple question. A quiet request. Something that could have looked harmless if you did not know what came before it. I thought about Raymond. I thought about the hotel. I thought about Marcus telling me he had stayed home that night. Every answer seemed to create another question. That afternoon, I called Raymond. Mr. Brooks? Yes, ma'am. This is Evelyn Carter. He recognized my voice immediately. Mrs. Carter. Is everything okay? I need to ask you about that night. There was a pause. What about it? You said Marcus was with a woman. Yes. Did he say where they were going? Raymond took a breath. He asked me to stop at the Franklin Hotel first. My hand tightened around the phone. Was that before the airport? Yes. How long were they there? About 40 minutes. I closed my eyes. The hotel was not part of Marcus's official itinerary. Raymond continued. I remember because the woman stayed in the car for a few minutes. She was worried. Did she say anything? Not much. What did she say? Raymond hesitated. She asked him whether his mother knew about the documents. I sat very still. Documents. Not business. Not travel. Documents. Did Marcus answer her? I asked. He said, she doesn't need to know yet. I lowered the phone from my ear for a moment. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. I put the phone back. Are you certain? Yes, ma'am. I remember because I thought it was strange. I thanked him and ended the call. I did not cry. I did not call Marcus. I simply opened my notebook and wrote the sentence exactly as Raymond had remembered it. She asked whether his mother knew about the documents. He said she didn't need to know yet. I underlined the last 3 words. Yet. That meant there was a plan. Maybe they intended to tell me later. Maybe they intended to make a decision before I could stop them. I did not know. But I knew enough to stop pretending this was a misunderstanding. That evening, Marcus called. Mom, how are you? Fine. Did you get the documents I sent? I paused. What documents? There was silence on the other end. Nothing. Never mind. I could hear him breathing. Mom, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. I looked at the folder beside me. Then talk. He hesitated. It might be easier when I get back. I smiled faintly. Marcus, you are already back. Another silence. He finally said, I know. I waited. He did not continue. So I said, whenever you're ready. We ended the call. I sat alone at the table, looking at the papers spread in front of me. 6 years after Danielle's death, I had believed my husband's greatest gift to me was the security he had left behind. Now I realized it was something else. He had left me the ability to say no. And for the first time in a very long time, I was prepared to use it. I closed the folder and locked it away. I was not going to chase my son. I was not going to fight my daughter-in-law. I was simply going to wait. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when people think you know nothing is let them believe they still have time to reveal everything. 3 days later, Marcus asked me to meet him for lunch. He chose a quiet restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the tables were far enough apart that people could have private conversations without being overheard. I arrived 10 minutes early. I ordered coffee and sat near the window. When Marcus walked in, he looked older than he had a week before. Not physically. In the way a person looks when they have been carrying a sentence they do not want to say. He sat across from me and placed his phone face down on the table. Mom, he began. I waited. There's something I should have told you. I folded my hands in my lap. I thought there might be. He looked at me carefully. How did you know? I almost smiled. A mother notices things. He looked down. Danielle and I were trying to figure out a way to protect some of the company's assets. I said nothing. There are some changes we wanted to make. Nothing that would hurt you. I looked through the window at the traffic moving along the street. Then why didn't you tell me? Marcus rubbed his forehead. Because I knew you would worry. That is not an answer. He sighed. We thought it would be easier if we handled it first. I looked back at him. Handled what? He hesitated. The trust. There it was. The word I had been waiting to hear. And the documents? I asked. His face changed. Just slightly. What documents? I watched him for a moment. The ones you asked Patricia about. He went completely still. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. His eyes moved toward the window, then back to me. Mom, I can explain. I'm sure you can. He swallowed. Danielle thought there was a way to restructure everything so the company would have more flexibility. And you agreed? I considered it. Without telling me. I was going to tell you. I nodded slowly. When? He had no answer. The waiter arrived with our food. Neither of us touched it. Finally, Marcus said, I was afraid you would say no. I looked at my son. That sentence hurt more than anything else he had said. Not because he wanted something. Because he already knew my answer mattered. He simply hoped he could make the decision before I had a chance to give it. Marcus, I said quietly, your father did not leave me a collection of papers. He left me a choice. My son looked down. I know. Do you? He did not answer. I reached into my purse and placed a copy of the trust document on the table. His eyes widened. Where did you get that? From Patricia. He stared at the page. Mom, you should have come to me. He nodded. I know. I leaned back. And Danielle should have come to me too. He looked away. I could see the shame in his face, but I could also see something else. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of what would happen if the plan failed. What happens now? He asked. I looked at him for a long moment. Now, nothing happens without my knowledge. He nodded slowly. I folded the document and put it back into my purse. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. The taxi had given me the first clue. Patricia had given me the facts. Marcus had finally given me the truth. But there was still one person who had not spoken. Danielle. And I had a feeling that when she did, I would finally understand why she had asked my son one simple question that night, whether his mother knew.